Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. My guest tonight is Michael Darrow, who is tribal historian and NAGPRA contact person for the Fort Sill Apache Tribe. Welcome, Michael. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Can you give us a little bit of background first on your tribe? I know there are two tribes in Oklahoma with Apache in the name. Let's clarify what tribe we're talking about.
This is the Fort Sill Apache Tribe, which culturally and linguistically is referred to by the linguists and anthropologists as Chiricahua, which is not really an accurate name insofar as we're concerned, but that's what has been established in the literature. So, so we're the Chiricahua bunch. We're the ones with Cochise and Geronimo, and our home territory was out in New Mexico and Arizona, and we're an entirely different nation from the other Apache tribe that exists here in Oklahoma, who they are a group that was that the linguists and anthropologists would call Kiowa Apaches.
I know. We don't say that today, do we?
but they've changed their name officially so that they are now the Apache Tribe of Oklahoma. But they are an entirely different people from us.
All right. And the languages, I assume, are related, but a person speaking one language couldn't necessarily understand what the person speaking the other is saying?
The languages are related, and it gets into a matter of interpretation as to the degree of intelligibility or non-intelligibility. Generally, most of the languages of the Apache nations are considered mutually intelligible with difficulty. However, the Kiowa Apache language is more different from all the other languages, Apache languages, than the other Apache languages are from one another.
I think they're calling that, at least linguists I know are calling that Plains Apache now, or Prairie Apache, to avoid the term Kiowa Apache. Which
yeah, but that causes other complications because there was another group of Apaches that used to exist on the southern plains before that group moved in, and that previous group was also known as Plains Apaches. And if you use that terminology, it gives the impression that they're the same group as the Apache Tribe of Oklahoma, which is not the case.
Oh my goodness.
So it gets complicated.
It does. Well, let's come back to your tribe. Your tribe, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about the history as far as how what's now the Fort Sill Apache Tribe came to be no longer in New Mexico and now in Oklahoma. Do you want to give a little brief capsule history of that?
It's difficult to make it brief, but I'll see what I can do.
Feel free, as much as you need to.
Our nation was located, our homelands were located in what is now New Mexico, southwest New Mexico, southeast Arizona, and northern parts of Sonora and Chihuahua in Mexico. That was our home territory, and one of the things I'm doing is trying to revise the history books, because a lot of the history books are profoundly biased, particularly when it comes to speaking about Apaches. So I'll try to go with some of my revised terminology and go ahead and say that our territory was invaded and occupied by non-Indians who came in and decided that Apaches didn't have any rights and ought to be moved off of this valuable land that they were not utilizing properly, and any Apaches that tried to resist being moved off of their homeland were treated very poorly, we'll say. We had some reservations established. We tried to maintain good relations, but those reservations were abolished, and our tribe was moved off of their reservations in their own homelands onto somebody else's reservation. And in trying to remedy some of the problems concerning that and the way they were being treated and that they were trying to get back to their own homeland, some of them left the other reservations out in Arizona where they of some other tribe that they had been placed on. And while most of them had stayed where they were told to stay, those who had left were being chased by soldiers and eventually agreed to come in under certain conditions. They didn't know they were being lied to at the time, but it was very plainly obvious that the general who was doing it knew at the time what he was doing. So what happened was that everybody that they could find who was of our tribe, whether they stayed on the reservation, whether they'd left the reservation, whether they'd made an agreement with the government, they were all shipped off as prisoners of war. They were held in Florida for 1 or 2 years, depending on how you count, before being moved to Alabama, where they were held 6 or 7 years, depending on how you count. And then in 1894, they were moved to Fort Sill in Oklahoma, and they were kept there as prisoners of war for 19 more years. Altogether 28 years as prisoners of war. And not because they did anything wrong, but because they were Apaches. They were essentially political prisoners. And they were not released until it was politically convenient that they be released. And upon their release, they were not allowed to have Fort Sill as they had been promised as their reservation. The options that were available to them were to join the Mescalero Apache tribe on a Mescalero reservation in New Mexico, or remain on allotments of, not remain on, but move to allotments of farmland in Oklahoma. And so the tribe split in 2 groups in 1913, and the larger group moved onto the Mescalero reservation in New Mexico. And the smaller group stayed in Oklahoma on allotments of farmland. And so the group in Oklahoma has retained the name of Fort Sill Apache because that was applied to us while we were at Fort Sill.
I see.
The name for our tribe gets into other complicated things as to why we're not referred to as Chiricahua, or another term that's could be used as Warm Springs Apache, and that's not the official term of our tribe because of some other complicating factors. So we kind of settled on the term Fort Sill Apache, even though that's not really an accurate way to term the tribe. It's just the least of the evils, I guess, insofar as the terminology is concerned.
More complicated than I realized. Well,
that was the short version.
Yes, I'm sure. Often when I have someone on the show to talk about a particular language, one of the first things I ask them is how to greet someone in their language. Is there anything you'd like to say about greetings in Apache?
Well, we don't have anything that's equivalent to saying hello. So you can't say hello. Generally, if you see somebody you know, you just approach them and initiate a conversation. You ask, one of the more common things would be to ask them where they're going. You'd say Harinya, which is a contraction of some other term, Hayarinya, which means where are you going? And they would reply telling where they're going. Like if they're going to Lawton, they would say Lawton Yariya. Or something else you could do is ask them how they're doing. So I wrote down sort of an exchange on that. You could say Dante, which would be how are you? And a response for that you could say Duranstera Niedante. Duranstera means I'm sort of like I'm fine. It says there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah.
And Niedante means how are you?
Okay.
You could say let's see. Better check my notes. I have which means thank you, I feel good.
Oh, okay.
See, some of these are not standardized greetings. You just have to
Yeah.
sort of improvise a conversation as you go
Uh-huh.
along. You could say, how are your relatives? How are your children? You could say, oh, they're all good. Things like that. It's good. Glad I saw you. It's good seeing you, or something like that. Let's see, I'm glad I saw you. Things like that.
Great. Well, you're talking about it referring to your notes. This kind of brings us to let's get some basic facts about the language situation established here. How many people do speak the language? Do you hear it spoken around where you live? What's a little bit of the language history? What kind of situation is the language in today?
Okay, when our tribe was released from being prisoners of war, everybody spoke the language.
Everybody still. I guess that figures.
The situation with the Fort Sill Apache group is that the language pretty much ceased being taught with that first generation after the release.
That suddenly.
In our tribe, you're not supposed to marry anybody who's related to you. And all the possible combinations that could be made were made while they were prisoners of war at Fort Sill, so most all of the people were already related to one another. So once they were released, they would marry outside the tribe, either to other tribes or to non-Indians. And so most of the people in our tribe didn't grow up in a family where both parents were Fort Sill Apache. The parents would be speaking to one another in English.
Right, because that was their common language.
That was their common language between them, and so from that point down through these generations, the people who were children at that time, most of them understand the language, but have difficulty speaking it, and we have some of those people who are still alive today. The last person who could fluently speak the language and hold a conversation passed away in '93. But we have people who if you ask them individual words, they can tell you individual words or short phrases, but for holding a conversation, it's difficult for them to do that. For those people that went to Mescalero, the situation is a little bit better, but also somewhat bleak in that they went out there, and the Mescalero language is fairly closely related to Chiricahua, and they would intermarry with that group, but the Chiricahua language was generally not dominant, and so right now out at Mescalero there are still some people who speak Chiricahua, but it also is dying out there, and the Mescalero language is taking its place. So besides which, those who went to Mescalero, even though there are some there that speak Chiricahua, their version is a Mescalero influenced version of Chiricahua. So we have to be careful if we go out there and ask them how to say this or that. We have to bring the information back and check with our own folks to find out if that's the way they remember it being said.
It's a pretty long
before we
reach
can-
sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
What about in your own family? What's the last relative you know of in your family that spoke the language?
Well, my grandmother could speak the language, and I learned when I first started trying to make notes or learn something of the language and some of the songs, I was able to speak with her, and she passed away in '81. And my mother understands the language and can give individual words or can tell me when I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but she doesn't can't hold a conversation herself. So I'm able to use her to reference to a certain extent, provided she's not busy with other things, which she frequently is. So.
Right. Well, now, I've known you slightly over a period of several years, and I've always kind of had you in my mind as a scholar of your language. It sounds like from the information you've just given us that there really isn't much of a language community as such, and it has become sort of a scholarly interest. What kind of work have you done with the language, and what kind of time have you put in? What sorts of things do you do when you study your language?
Well, I'm getting pressure from some of my brothers and sisters to do something whereby they will be able to learn the language, which is going to be pretty tricky because I'll have to learn the language first because I don't know the language. I know a lot more of it than I did when I started out. Sure. But I don't know if you've heard it said before, but Apache languages are extremely difficult languages. They can get very complicated, and it's a good portion of it is very different from English. So in a lot of cases, when we had some language classes a few years back, our own tribal members would have to go over some of the sounds with them again and again and again to be able to get them to be able to pronounce the sounds, because we have a sound.
I heard that sound a little while ago when you were going through the greetings.
Yeah, there was someone who came up at one dance and was asking my aunt and some others how he was wanting to give a name to his horse. He decided he wanted to call his horse Black Horse in Apache, and wanted us to pronounce it for him. And so we did.
Did you thoroughly discourage him?
And yeah, we did. Well, you say and he said, well, could you say that again? Well, yeah. Well, say it again, but say it more slowly. And he was never quite able to get it. And finally he decided that he didn't really want to name his horse that. So
another story of great discouragement early in the language learning process.
Yes. I said, well, it's a very simple thing. The word for horse is just two sounds. It's the and the e. And if you can say then you can say horse. But most people in English, both of those sounds don't occur in English.
Right.
And so it's not something they can do very easily. It takes a lot of practice for people who are English language oriented to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, tell us, I know you've brought some stuff here we haven't had a chance to show yet. Do you want to, you have a chart to do with the language? Would you like to show that?
Oh, yes.
Or
this is basically in relation to the different Apachean nations.
Oh, this is not the language.
So this is not specifically
it's sort of this language
This
indirectly, but this is about the...
Yeah, because they have different language.
Okay. May I hold this up for you, and maybe you can talk about it while I do that.
A lot of people seem to think that Apache is just one tribe, and it's not.
I don't know if we're going to be able to read this very well. Well, talk about the chart a little bit. We'll see if we can get a good shot.
And it's a group of nations. When you say the Apachean languages are in what's known as the Athabascan language group. And when you say Athabascan, it's equivalent to saying Indo-European. So within Indo-European, you have all these different groups, you have Germanic languages and Romance languages and things like that. Within the Athabascan languages, you have different divisions, and one of those divisions is what's known as Southern Athabascan, or also known as Apachean.
Okay.
just like in Indo-European, you have Romance languages, and there are several different nations that are included in that. They have France and Spain and Italy and Portugal. Within the Southern Athabascan or Apachean language groups, you have several different nations, and that's the Navajos, the Western Apache Nation, the Chiricahua, the Mescalero, the Lipan, the Jicarilla, and the Kiowa Apache. In linguistics, they're still called Kiowa Apaches.
Not among linguists I know, but we'll go with that.
Oh.
But again, I've heard people use Plains Apache, and you were objecting to that, so let's just stick with that for the time being. We know who we mean. We don't mean any offense.
Yeah. So anyway, each of those is a separate nation. They have their own history, their own culture. They're known for different things. They have their own territories and homelands.
Were they all from the sort of New Mexico, Arizona, and northern Mexico area, though?
All of them except for one. And we know which one that is. All of these are, let's see, there was a linguist by the name of Harry Hoyer who did these glottochronology studies. And what he found was that the group that's listed as Kiowa Apache is off to one side by itself, different from the other Apaches who are all coherently related to one another. And also that works geographically, because when the Kiowa Apache group was first encountered, they were up north, not in contact with all of the rest of the Apache people in the southwest.
Okay.
So
they were sort of the outliers geographically.
Yeah, geographically and culturally and linguistically, they were all they're different from the rest of these. These have traits in common, but they also have very significant differences. The Lipans and Mescaleros and Jicarillas use teepees, whereas the Chiricahuas and the Western Apaches don't. And the Navajos, even though linguistically and culturally they're more closely related to the Western Apaches and the Chiricahuas and Mescaleros than they are to the Jicarillas and Lipans. The Navajos historically have been separated into a different group, and they're not considered Apaches anymore.
Well, they've just given me the signal we have less than 5 minutes left now, so maybe what shall we do? I know you brought some more extensive samples of what Apache sounds like. Would you like to talk about stories or songs? And maybe you could say a word about, I mean, one of my pet themes on this show is that a language isn't just a language. It's also tied up with the culture. I think you were telling me nowadays some people can still sing songs in your language, but they don't always know exactly what they're saying. They don't have the full linguistic appreciation. You want to say a word about songs or about stories? Or?
Well, the songs and stories, some of the songs are still fairly well known. I learned some of the church songs from my grandmother, because that's something she was known for being the person who knew the church songs. That was trying to write those out was part of how I got started trying to learn some of the language, and my language skills have developed so that I can read what's written and pronounce what I see written.
Okay.
I've got some of the church songs here, and can sing just a single verse or something like that.
That'd be great.
This one's my grandfather's song. Translates as, "It's good to live for Jesus." So it's saying, live for Jesus and talk for him. And it goes, Jesus pachi nagu jon. Should Jesus pachi nagu jon. Akagu nagu joni nea. Jesus pachi nagu dapaya jiltigo nagu joni nea. Should Jesus pachi nagu jon. Should Jesus pachi nagu jon. Akagu nagu joni nea.
Wow, that is beautiful. It has a really distinctive sound, different from other hymns I've heard in other Oklahoma Indian languages. Very, very beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So do people still sing some hymns in the language?
Unfortunately, my grandmother passed away, and my two aunts and I would be the ones who'd sing these, and it got to where we were just singing them at funerals and things like that. Then my aunt passed away, so it was one of my aunts and me singing them, and then my other aunt passed away. So now when there are funerals or events at church, it's pretty much just me singing them. We have some people who try to follow along, but I'm pretty much the only one who's singing them.
Wow. Well, you're doing a very good job, I must say.
Thank you.
Now, we only have about a minute left, and I have a question here that, in a way, on one level, it's sort of silly, but I think it might be of interest to people, because this is a language that's, you know, there's not really a language-speaking community in Oklahoma, at least, and there's only a small amount of the language left that people know. But one thing you said to me when we were talking before the show really interested me, and I think people in other situations with more healthy languages, but you know, all of the languages in our state are endangered, the Indian languages, they might be interested to hear about this. What you said was, if I remember correctly, I think you said that just about everybody over 40 knows a few words in Apache, maybe about 6 of them. I'm curious, could you share with us what those words are? It'd be interesting to hear what people do hold on to in a situation like that.
Generally you can say yes and no. Say ao
yes and no.
or dura, and they know that. You can say kecha, which is a dog, cha, which is what the babies leave in their diapers,
Right.
trajet, which is chicken, and people would know that. And the rest is pretty much undeterminable. A word my cousin remembered was chanas masle, which is a dung beetle.
Wow, it's a tongue twister too.
Yeah.
I'm sorry they're giving us all kinds of signals. We have to wrap it up. I hope you're going to be recording those songs if you haven't already. They're beautiful. I'd hate to see them go with you, even though you're a silly young man. I hope you're looking forward to preserving them so other future generations can hear them. I want to thank you very much for coming to Norman tonight to be with us, Michael. I really appreciate it. See you next time on Wordpath.
Ana magwana kita wa pele ma daole kita